This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. It's episode 760, and this week we welcome Scott Maysura for a show we're calling Undeserved Restoration Job Titles Cause Industry Problems. Cliff and I and Pete noticed an article that Scott wrote in CNR Magazine, and we wanted to bring him on to talk about it on the show. Before we get started, let's thank our other sponsors. We can't do the show without them. IAQ Radio's marquee sponsor is the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry at iicrc.org. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are the Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at eia-usa.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com. Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com. EMSL Analytical Inc. at emsl.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to report that Chris White with Win White Consulting Engineers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was first to identify Henry Gaunt as the American engineer best known for his development, scientific management, and creation of a chart employed on major infrastructure projects, including the Hoover Dam, which continued to be an important tool in project management and program management. Here's today's IAQ Radio trivia question. Who coined the term artificial intelligence? Back to you, Joe.
All right. Scott Maysura is a seasoned business consultant and advisor with over 20 years of experience in the restoration and services industry. Beyond owning and operating restoration companies, he successfully grew a plumbing and HVAC startup, providing him with firsthand knowledge of the challenges and opportunities faced by trade businesses. As I mentioned, we ran across Scott. I think Scott and Cliff met at RIA, and then we ran across an article he wrote called Undeserved Restoration Job Titles Cause Industry Problems. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. We appreciate it. And, let's start with a little background on you. If you could tell our audience a little bit about your background and then your restoration-related background as well.
A little bit of background. Originally from Michigan. That's where we operated at Paul Davis. I think it was around 2002, 2003. Pretty much when the crash happened, right? My dad got laid off, transitioned in corporate world. There was some transition where I was doing as a communications, I guess. I was pretty much one of the core groups that were going in and installing high-speed internet, right, when it first started, like Roadrunner. So got into that, was making a ton of money, but just like anything in the industry, you got your peaks and valleys, and the valley was hitting and an opportunity came up and we started Paul Davis. And that was not the start of the career, but it was the beginning of actually the profession of what I was doing. Before that, I started as a labor technician when I was 17 for a local company in Lansing, Michigan. So from there, just peaks and valleys, lots of failures along the way that I learned from, and obviously some successes. Just a high level. I mean, pretty much anything underneath the restoration umbrella I've been involved in, from high leadership levels all the way down to, again, startups, and now consulting and business advising.
Cliff? Yep. Scott, the article that you put together pulls no punches, right from the start, saying that titles have become watered down in the restoration industry. Can you elaborate on the most significant impact you've seen from this dilution of job titles?
The most significant impact, I would say, there's several, right? On an operational level, we're starting to fill gaps where our technicians should be should be filling, right? So we're adding management levels or supervisory levels into it, and then we can see the insurance companies are pushing back on uh, project management or supervision, right? And in all reality, um, should we be charging for some of that stuff? Absolutely, but it's also depending on the complexity of the loss. So a day-to-day loss, I don't believe that needs necessarily that full supervision level because your technician should be able to handle it from start to finish, right? And you know, just really on that true definition of what a technician is. I have a multiple perspective of it, right? And so plumbing and HVAC, you have journeymen, right? They have years to get that license, those certifications. Do you see a project manager or supervisor showing up to a plumbing or an HVAC job to diagnose the problem, right? To provide that customer experience, to collect the money. Obviously, there's differences in the services, but when we think of a technician, um, they're not just helpers or laborers. They're it's a true trade, right? And I think the first step was getting our trade designation, right? But now they're skilled field leaders, right? Especially a crew chief or a lead tech, whatever people want to call them. But the role is the same. They solve problems on the spot. They need to diagnose a problem, come up with solutions. Um, they need to set the tone and the quality for every job. And I think that is the biggest impact. And I can go through examples of um, why I kind of love the companies that didn't do that because I became the fix it man because my team came in and provided a different experience.
Scott, you mentioned that now restoration technicians are a trade. I don't think we've talked about that on the show yet because I think that's a rather recent development. Didn't RIA help in kind of promoting that? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I believe they got an IRS designation. So when you file for your business on IRS, there's these designations of where you fit in, whether you're a consulting company or construction or whatever. There's never been a restoration one. I believe IRA was a big push on it. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but we now have our own designation as a business, separate to anything else. We're not just construction.
And how does that help or hurt a restoration contractor now?
It helps in fact that we're designated as an entity in our own. We are our own industry. We're not construction. We're not remodelers. We are a specific specialized business. And with that is going to come some other things, right? RAs does a great job. So does IICRC in getting certifications. There's going to be I view a next step so we can definitely see kind of like that journeyman master plumber designation like crew, like whether it's test taking or whatever. When you get a plumber's master's here in New Mexico, um, you got to do not just a written test, you actually got to do a hands-on, right? How do you sweat a pipe? They want to make sure you can actually do the work. And I think that's where we're missing a little bit. Yeah, we have ASD, and it's kind of like that. You know what I mean? You go in and you do it, but there is no real hands-on test of taking somebody from start to finish and do they understand the process?
Interesting. Cliff?
Yep. I think when I read the article, one of the things that you said is that things were different, back in 2002 and 2003, from a responsibility standpoint than they are today. So could you
Yeah.
just list some of the categories and what was different back in 2002 versus how it is currently?
Again, I think it all goes down to consistent training, making sure there's a cadence in training and development. There's some companies that do a very good job on it, but in my capacity and my role in the industry now, I see that it's lacking, right? And So the difference is again, you have people that are just laborers. They don't know, they're not taking the ownership of the entire project of what they do. Does that make sense? So when it comes down to it, we have restoration companies that are filling gaps. So in 2002, 2003, the Paul Davis model, which, I was introduced to, and they did a fantastic job during their month training to just to be able to open. It's kind of like that sell right run model. Like if you were a good project manager, you knew everything in and out of that project, from the customer interaction, how to write a good scope of work, right? And then planning the job, dealing with subcontractors or your internal team, setting the budget and driving those gross profits based on, right, the scope that you wrote. Um, the technician side, right? I, I think it's just generationally over time. The way I explain it is this: you guys been around, and you explained it in some other episodes too, that there's people leaving the industry, right? So you have private equity coming in. You have franchise systems developing over and over, right? More and more franchise systems. And so that's bringing in a lot of people from outside the industry into it. And they may have been very successful in their previous careers, but they're coming into something new and they don't have that same knowledge that they did in their previous career. And so you have veterans like myself or you guys, we're leaving and they're not transferring that knowledge down. So the way I explain it is this: if I'm an A player or an A plus player in the industry and I trade somebody and I don't, and let's say due to whatever reasons, I train a B. Well, what happens? B's good enough, but then the B's are training the next level, and over time, and then the B's, right, it goes down to C's and so forth. So we're losing that informational, that knowledge gap that we should have. Um, I'm a big believer of being a student of the industry. So there's always something you can learn in the industry. And I just been meeting with some teams lately, and the last time they did any education was 7 years ago when they took to the WRT. And that's just not good enough.
Well, let's just expand upon it a little bit. Okay, you said a lot of things, and you talked about training being diluted, and I think the industry has diluted it. There were a lot of, particularly when the water restoration standard came out, a lot of insurance companies adopted it. They wanted all the technicians to have water restoration, technology training and so on and so forth. And I think what happened is you had a certain number of IICRC trainers whose first skill may not have been water damage restoration, might have been carpet cleaning, might have been carpet dyeing, might have been carpet inspection or upholstery cleaning or whatever. But these guys were teaching that subject, and they had, it was easy for the instructor to take a course, get a 90% or better on the course, and then they were kind of able to teach it, and they really didn't have the skill. So the instructors were also diluted. Okay, so then instead of like you're the A teaching the B's, now you have the B instructors, teaching new people coming in. And if you didn't have the experience, you don't know how to answer the questions and so on and so forth. I think also industry standards played a role because, prior to, 1995, when S500 first came out, the restoration contractor called the shots. The crew chief called the shots. They were out there what needed to be done. They were going to do it. Now they had this document that they had to refer to. And instead of being a performance-based document, it was a prescriptive document. You must do this. You must do that. You shall do this. You shall do that. And, you can't have one set of rules and regulations that's applicable to every single claim. Right. And then another thing that happened is, back to the certifications, RIA put together this certification called Certified Restorer. I mean, it was a serious designation, and it was a week-long class. It was a hellacious test. You had to write a paper in order to get a couple initials after your name, CR. And just think about it. If you're the homeowner and someone's going to come to your house, you can either choose between the CR or the master fire restorer. Which one are you going to hire? Okay. You don't necessarily know what a CR is, but you do know what a master plumber is. So
Right.
automatically, one term sounds better than the other.
Mhm.
And what happened from a designation standpoint is you took the CR, you were able to have a stamp that said CR, you can stamp your documents. You're able to use those letters after your name, certified restorer. And then all of a sudden, you had people that took a 1 day water restoration course because that's what it was. It was 1 day before it went to 2 day. So they come out of there, the water restoration technology. They might have never done a water damage. Next thing you know, they have Cliff Slotnick WRT, after my name, and it has three. And again, there was a lot of stuff that I think in many ways we kind of as an industry kind of shot ourselves into the foot, when it came to giving people designations and so on and so forth. It may not have always been deserved, but yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a difference in training, right? So IICRC, WRT, great class, full of information, but there's and you got to have CE credits every so many 2 years or whatever it is, right? 14 now, I believe it is. But when it comes down to it, you have to understand, right? I have a degree in psychology too, but when you have to understand the ability for people to retain information. So when you go take a class after that first day, if there's no reinforcement of those principles we're doing, and it's just an overload of information, they're basically preparing you to pass a test. It's knowledge based only. There's no practicality to it. How the actual how to, you don't get that until the ASD. So unless you take the WRT ASD combination, right, you're really getting it both and seeing it in action. But if you separate it out, you may lose some stuff. So just the human mind in general, they say usually typically within 24 hours, you're going to lose 50%, right, of what you just learned, right? And so whatever I talk about today, within a couple hours, people lose 50% of the content. Within 24 hours, it's like 75 or 60%, right? And then within 1 week, they only retain maybe 20%. So just think of that in 1 week's period, you only retain 20% of the information you were just taught last week.
Well, let's take it one step further. I think the IICRC test passing criteria, if I'm not mistaken, was 70%. So you could theoretically miss 30%,
Yeah.
and you don't know what you missed. Okay, imagine taking a class for flying an airplane or scuba diving or anything, and you got the question wrong about putting down the landing gear or
Right.
whatever. It could be a life and death situation, or turning on your air before you go underwater, and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of times, even the training that we had, the students didn't always necessarily know what they missed. I think it's better now. I think they know kind of the general areas that they need reinforcement in, but I think they still don't know the things that they miss.
Yeah, and one way to gap that, I'm not putting it all on our RA or ICRC. This is on ownership. This
Right.
is on the leaders of our businesses. Continuous training and development and reinforcement of those core concepts, is very important. And if you don't have that cadence of continuous development training in your specific role, how are you supposed to get better and become that professional that everybody expects you to? Just lean on the technician side, right? How is the customer supposed to have a fantastic experience? That 5 star, I call it being a 5 star tech, if you're not a 5 star tech. If you're a 3 star tech in knowledge and practicality, can you provide those truly a 5 star service? We're just kind of being hypothetical in here. What does that look like? Well, it looks like my technician is in the front of the homeowner or has to leave and say, I got to call my boss to get the answer for you.
Or,
What is
or
that? What kind of confidence is that to give to the adjuster or the customer?
or some of us are old enough to remember the TV show Leave It to Beaver, or the technician could be Eddie Haskell. Oh, Mrs.
Right.
Cleaver, yeah, you look wonderful today, or whatever. But yeah, you're right, absolutely.
So what do we do with that? It's not just training to pass knowledge. It's actually like I do the show, do, reinforce methodology in regards. I'm going to show you, transfer the knowledge. Now you got to show me you can do it, and then the next month we're just reinforcing that one topic, whatever it may be. Um, bring the practicality, the scenarios into the situation, right? AI is a great way of actually a learning tool. It's just not a it's we can get into that if you want to, but AI is a great learning tool, but provide scenarios. What I did here in Albuquerque is I provided a scenario. I brought the home team together, right? Here's the category, here's the class, the situation, X, Y, and Z. And now you got to develop me the scope, the dry plan, and everything else. And then we're all going to review it as a team and what we missed, what we didn't, right? It's going to be called after action reviews. And that's the other part too, right? Having after action reviews. How do you learn better than when you review the actions we took, good and bad? We want to reinforce the good just as much as we want to learn from the challenges.
I think we were talking last week about it when we were talking to John Isaacson, and Consigli said, called it an autopsy without blame. And, he got the term in a book and so on and so forth. But no, absolutely. I think it's very, very valuable. And, I think also last week when we were talking to John Isaacson, he talked about, being hired to, run a division for, a large restoration company. And they hired him because they had a lack of training. And he had, I guess every Thursday he would do training classes, and he's got 8 or 10 guys in there, and he's training them on a Thursday. And, his boss walks in and he's like, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm training." He says, "Well, I'm losing money. You got 10 people here. It's costing me this amount of money per hour," and so on and so forth. So I think sometimes, I think that ownership of the company thinks that training is going to happen by way of Vulcan mind meld or something like that, rather than taking the time to actually do it and invest in it.
And I love companies that have that mentality because I get work out of it, right? Because they don't take your training, right? I'm thinking of it as a business owner, as a business advisor. You, when we budget for the year, you should have a budget for training that includes the labor, if I'm sending people to classes and whatever else. If you don't have a training budget, then you're cutting yourself short, and it's short-minded, right? So we're talking about pay scales too. So I believe in level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 technician. Like you can do that with a project manager or an estimator. They have as they go up in level, they have additional authority or decision making powers, but they're also more efficient. So if you want to be right, and just to be fair, like the title I originally wrote was title inflation is killing, not undeserved titles. I think everybody deserves the role they have. But it's title inflation, right?
Gotcha.
And so as the higher you go up in those levels or your experience, you should get paid more. But that's because you're more efficient and you're more expertise in what you do, which means your bottom line in theory is going to be greater, not worse. If I send out and I don't spend the time training my people, my bottom line, right? Right. Labor is the number one thing a restorer on mitigation could control to control their gross profit, which controls their destiny. If I can control my labor, I can control my destiny, right? On mitigation, right? Or anything labor intensive. And so if I get more efficient, experienced, professional technicians, that means my labor ideally is dropping, means I don't need to need maybe 1 p.m. for every 2 crews. I need 1 p.m. for maybe every 4 crews. So I'm actually reducing my overhead too. So it all relates to the bottom line if you're looking at it as an owner, right? On a big picture. When we're saying training, I got 8 guys costing me X many, dollars per hour. You're costing me $1,000 here that we're not making money. But in all reality, that's short term because now every topic that we trained, they got better at and they were more efficient. And so they're in a month to maybe even a year, maybe 18 months, depends on where your team is at, you can see a better bottom line.
You know, we're getting a little off what we started on here, but I just am curious, Scott. This training, I'm a firm believer in training, don't get me wrong, but isn't part of the problem that business owners are caught between a rock and a hard place? They're told what they can charge for these jobs, basically. They have to follow a certain model. Is the training built into those prices they get?
No,
And what's the solution? You're not getting enough to pay to train the guys.
sure. The solution it goes into the other titles that we give, estimator and project manager, right? And so, but there's also understanding, am I following an SLA standard for stuff that's not a program job? How do I negotiate to the best ability that I can? Estimators need to be good negotiators. They're not data entry. They got to know, right? Ideally, the way I structure it, they know what the budget is. They set the budget for the project manager conservatively. So when they go to an adjuster or a client and they need to negotiate a price, they know their bottom line. So Exactament, right? Even states that the line items don't include those types of overhead in their line items, right? 10 and 10 does not cover that. We're not going to talk about that today, but it starts with just being more efficient with the people we have, discussing the scopes of work that we can improve so the dollar amount fits the budget. And if it does, then you will have the money for the training.
Okay. Cliff?
Yeah. I think one of the challenges with training is, what you're training them to do might not be what's going to be on the next job. You're training in water damage today, and your next job is a fire, or you're training in fire today, and your next job's mold remediation, or whatever. I think, really one of the best ways to train the people is really on the job that they're doing. You can bring a person in, or you can have, someone that's that's a little bit more skilled with them, or a supervisor, whatever, kind of explain, on that job. And, I think that's might be one of the best ways to do it, because the people that are there kind of learn it together. They see the problems. It's not imaginary. It's like you said, I'm going to show you how to do it. Now show me that you can do it. And, so on and so forth. I thought one of the statistics that you had in your article was pretty telling. And I don't remember what the statistic was, but something about a percentage of company leaders reporting that there was a decline in field level technical skills. And I mean, this is among company owners, right? Do you remember what the number was?
57% of the company leaders reported a decline in field level technical skills. 42% of new restoration business owners in the last 10 years or so have entered without any formal management or leadership training. I mean, this stuff is not just restoration related. This is not one specific industry. This is business wide, right? But in terms of restoration, why is that happening? I can tell you, when I go into certain companies, I ask how many certs they have per employees and stuff. It's a very telling answer, right? I created an audit, right? It tells you on the maturity level of your business. Training is a big part of that, right? Your technical skills, your SOPs. But um, when it comes to the last 10 years, who are most of our new owners? It's a lot of people, 42% are probably technicians or PMs that were probably part of a private equity that integration maybe not has been the greatest. The culture has changed or the compensation's changed. And they said, you know what, I'm out. I can do this on my own. And they don't have any formal training. As a consultant, I know that firsthand because, right, I deep dive into their business and there's just a lot of things that are not being done that if you were a trained owner on a business, you would have these things set.
It sounds like, and maybe in your experience too, that for those people that don't have that type of background, getting with a franchise might be helpful. I mean, you did a month of training before you started. I think it was Paul Davis.
Yeah.
That seems like maybe that would be part of the answer.
Part of the answer, yes. Pros and cons with franchise systems, right? I won't get into that, but yeah, it's a great way of doing that. If you don't have a franchise system, then you need to use your network, RIA, network with people, go to conferences, search out the information, search out people like myself, maybe, or you guys, and say, hey, I'm facing this. What should I do next? Not everybody can pay for a business advisor or consultant, but I think the networking of the industry too, and that's part of it, is the fractionalization of business to business, right? RIA is trying to bring everybody back together, which is fantastic. But I always talk to my owners and I introduce them all to each other. and say, feel free to talk to each other. You guys are facing different things, real world stuff. Let's be a community. And then you can learn from that, right? Podcasts like this are a fantastic thing. I always look at business owners or PMs when I do a PM training or technician. What's the last podcast you listened to? What's the last training you've done other than this? Zero. Well, how are you supposed to get better at what you do? Are you taking ownership of your role?
Good point. Very good point. All right, before we go to halftime, we have an unfortunate bit of news to discuss. Grayson, you want to go ahead and cue up the taps, and then we'll go into it. Unfortunately, the industry lost Mickey Lee here recently, who was a great friend of the show and, of course, of the restoration industry. So before we go to Pete and Cliff for their words on Mickey, let's go ahead and play taps, Grayson.
Well,
Well,
the
this one
industry
came as a
lost.
great shock. Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, I've known Mickey met Mickey in the early 1990s. I've known him for over 3 decades, and well, not only is he going to be missed, but I think his influence will continue for years to come through his writings, all the education, all the training that he's done, and he was a real honest broker. He contributed with REA, IACRC, anything in the last 2 decades, anything that involved water damage restoration, drying, project management. Mickey was involved. He volunteered his time. He was integral over the last 2 decades in updating the WLS program. He was actually in the first class in 1999. He was part of the development for the commercial drying specialist course. He's done a number of those. In the recent years, well, of course, the S500, that kind of goes without saying. In the recent years, I know was involved with the 550 committee working on a commercial drying standard, but specifically with REA, I worked so closely with Mickey in the development of the project and risk management course, which is a prerequisite for the CR, the WLS, and a number of other programs within the REA. And he took a lot of pride in that. He was globally known for all the years that he worked with Munters, later rebranded to Polygon. And once we moved into the kind of digital Zoom world, he had a whole following in Australia. He did quite a few classes there on Zoom. And I had an opportunity to, on my last road trip, I was in Atlanta for a few days. And one afternoon, I spent with Mickey and his wife. I went out to his home. He prided himself in making soup from the bone marrow, and he had a famous soup called a Hoppin' John soup, and we had lunch. And then I spent a couple hours and just catching up on industry stuff. And one of the things we talked about was the need to pass on to the next generation the knowledge of those that, those of us like me and Cliff and others that have been around for a while that are kind of in our retirement years. And Mickey, as hard as it was for Mickey he was retiring and he slowed down, but he couldn't actually say that he was retired because he just loved training and interaction. And anyway, he'll be missed. I'm going to turn it over to Cliff now. Me and Cliff collaborated on a 3-page tribute, and it'll be part of the blog that'll go out next week. And I think REA is going to plan on sending something out to the membership. And I kind of took my memories of Mickey over the 3 decades. And Cliff, like nobody else, wrote about Mickey as a man. And I think he wants to close out this tribute by reading that. And anyway, all the IAQA listeners will get to take a look at it next week when the blog goes out. So anyway, here's to you, Mickey. We'll miss you.
Thanks, Pete. When I remember Mickey, four things come to mind. Consummate professional. Mickey demonstrated exceptional skill, knowledge, and experience in his field, consistently developing high performance and quality results. He was known for reliability, commitment to excellence, and ability to handle challenges effectively. Mickey was also known for his ability to manage large and complex projects. Gentle giant. The phrase captures two aspects of Mickey. Giant refers to his stature, not in terms of his natural height, more significantly, the success and reputation that he achieved. Mickey stood out, stood above, and was looked up to and respected by coworkers, colleagues, clients, and students. When Mickey spoke, people listened. Gentle highlights his personal qualities. He was a true gentleman, calm, patient, considerate, well-mannered, maintaining a high standard of personal behavior. Character. Underlying all of these traits, Mickey was devout, loving, fundamentally honest, honorable, sharing, and caring. He was a differentiator. One of the highest compliments a teacher or mentor can receive from a student or mentee is to be acknowledged and thanks for the positive difference that they made in someone's life. Mickey Lee was a differentiator, not just for people, but Mickey made the disaster restoration industry both more professional and much more well-respected. Back to you, Joe.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. By the way, we will be replaying during our August break here. We're going to replay a couple shows with Mickey, and we'll also be putting out a couple of small tributes as well. Really a wonderful person that I had so much respect for. I love people with that quiet, calm confidence about them, and that's the kind of gentleman Mickey was. All right, let's go to halftime, Grayson. IAQ Radio's marquee sponsor is the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry at iicrc.org. Association sponsors are the Environmental Information Association. EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at eia-usa.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, iicrc.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. Tramex Meters, innovation in moisture detection and humidity monitoring systems since 1974 at tramexmeters.com. EMSL Analytical Inc., providing high-quality, full-service laboratory services since 1981. EMSL.com. All right, Cliff, why don't you start off the second half here?
Thanks. In your article, you call to hire for quality and skill, not just performance at the current level.
Yeah.
What are some red flags during a hiring process that would suggest that a candidate might not understand the true responsibilities of a higher level role?
Yeah, so whether you're promoting from within or you going outside of your organization, it's all part of the interviewing process. So asking people specific open-ended questions. Josh Miller talked about it in one of your guys' episodes. Right. And he went through a thorough process to make sure that he was the right fit for his role at Rainbow. Right. And it's an extensive process from what he explained and what I understand of it. So it should be the same obviously the extensiveness of what that role is can determine the interviewing process, but I'm not going to be like, hey, Cliff, do you have any problem with conflict resolution? Like, you know what I mean? Well, everybody loves me, it should be more specifically oriented. If you're like, just tell me an example or a time, Cliff, when you had a specific, right? Be specific, the behavior and the impact and what you learned from it. But give me a specific example the last time you had a conflict with a homeowner, customer, or even a coworker. What was specifically the situation? What was the behaviors that drove it? What was the impact on the business? How did we solve it? And what did you learn from it? So when you get into quite open-ended questions like that, you're searching for people to use their real-world experience, right? And they're able to talk through it thoroughly. If they sit and think about it, that's okay because they're processing it, right? I don't expect somebody to answer it right away. Um, Project managers, right? So how I do something with a project manager? Give me a specific recent project that you just had and take me through the project life cycle, right? Um, Tell me what project, right? So take me through this project life cycle. What does that look like? What did you do on the initiation? What did you do on the planning? What is it on the execution side? And what was the closeout? As you're going through that example, tell me any challenges, obstacles you had, what were the solutions, and what was the outcome, right? And so when you get open-ended questions like that and you're interviewing people, yes, it's a harder interview, and it should be. Um, you're going to really understand if they actually are doing what you anticipate or you want them to do, right? You're already setting the expectation on the interview, what I need to know from you. On the flip side, if they don't have that experience, it's okay because if they are an A player, I know where if I onboard them, where I need to shore them up to make sure they're successful in the role when I bring them on. Does that make sense? So I'm not necessarily trying to niche somebody. I'm looking for air players. I got a good friend of mine. He hired an ex-military guy that went from no restoration experience, but was a fantastic A player, a fantastic leader. And then this owner put this gentleman through extensive training, get all the certs, gave him a little bit of ownership and leeway on like a leash of like you can own this, you can own this, and now the guy's becoming an operations manager in less than a year, right? And so we're looking for A players experience. We're looking for right that technical side of it.
Are you a believer, or have you ever utilized, personality profiling,
Oh yeah,
testing and so on and so forth? Which one do you like, or is there one particular?
I'm a disc. I'm a
Me-
disc guy.
I am too, absolutely. Yeah,
So I'm a
just
high D, I'm a high C. I have no
right.
I or S. I'm a V, right? And so when I first
Understood.
time I took it, the facilitator was walking around and said, "Oh my." And I had looked at him. I was like, "Good or bad?" He's like, "Oh, it depends on how you approach it."
No, that was my favorite. I had done some of the others, and by far, I think it's very accurate, very, very effective.
It is. And so if
Absolutely.
you look at each role where the disc can fit in,
Right,
do you need a driver in this, right? The
right, right,
characteristics, you're building a profile, I guess, if you want to say it. What does a successful PM look like on a personality test? Where they should fit in on it, right? A PM should be somewhat medium to high C, on the
right, right,
compliance,
right,
right? There also may be an I or an S and a little bit of D. It really
right,
depends.
right.
If you're a large loss guy, a big D like me, and a big C, right? The driver and the compliance is very important because there's a lot of money involved, and I need a dictator in this sense to drive what needs to happen.
You
Joe?
know, Scott, I'm curious. You talked earlier about training and development, and with the rapid evolution of technology and AI, how do you
Yeah.
see these advancements shaping training needs, 5 to 10 years down the road?
Um, Shaping training needs. I see AI going to be, it already is. It can help you plan for training, not necessarily teach it, right? There's a difference between the instructor I'm just passing knowledge on versus I'm showing you how to do it, right? You need both. So if I'm running through a specific problem or situation in my business, you can drop down the whole situation and said, I'm facing this. These are the main challenges I'm having with my technicians. It's been consistent over the last 6 months. I want to develop a training to solve it. First, can you help me pinpoint maybe some root causes to it, and then write a good training agenda around it. It's never going to take the knowledge away from us. Um, it's just going to help us be able to expedite some of that training, if that makes sense, to identify some pain points. Right now, we're in AI. We're on a version of AGI, which is general intelligence, which means that's going to be human ability to think, not just spit out. It's actually to be able to go through the scenario and think, and it's going to be able to respond like a human would.
Do you work with your customers on using AI, asking, as I understand it, it's all a big part of it is asking the right questions,
Prompting, yeah.
prompting. Okay. And do you do that in your work with your customers now?
Absolutely. I've been diving into it. I just bought the book Dummies for Chat GPT, how to build bots and stuff. There's that 2 minute tech of Doug Weatherman from Rare Restoration is put out there to help the industry. Like that's all great stuff. Is it going to give you 100% what you need? No, but the way I describe it is putting a 20-year master restore CR, right? 20-year master restore CR in the palm of your technician's hands so they can do a quick check on their project. So they can prompt it, put the scenario, the year, the state, the date, category, this, that, and it's saying this is what we did, and then it'll be able to give them, hey, you missed this or you did this. It can do amazing things. I mean, we can have a whole show just on AI.
Cliff,
Yep. Um,
do you want to go to the roundup, bring Pete back in, or you want to ask one more first?
one more, and then then I think we can go from there. For a restoration business owner who resonates with your article but feels overwhelmed by the task of implementing all these changes, what's the single most impactful piece of advice that you would offer them to get started?
AI,
Okay.
for sure. Because a lot of these owners may not even have the technical knowledge. And so implementing a process of using AI is going to help with that field experience. So we're making sure we're checks and balances it. The other thing too, right? There's two. So AI is one. The second is put a cadence of at least a monthly training topic, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour once a month, and just reinforce that the 30 days, and the next month you jump onto something else. It's little bits and pieces. If you're not, right, the best way to learn something is to train it. So if I don't know a topic and I'm an owner and I got to train a team of technicians, I'm going to research it all month long. So when I go into the next month, I learned it as well as I'm teaching it. So it doesn't matter where you're at a leadership level. I think that a monthly cadence of training is super important. That includes, even around safety, which is much not a very well talked about topic in our industry.
I think that's a good point. The best way to know something is to train it. I like that, and I think
Yeah.
that's something that would help a lot of business owners. Let's go to the roundup, Grayson. All right, today the roundup is brought to us by Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com. Let's go to the first to the restoration industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli. Pete, final thoughts or questions for Scott?
Yeah. Well, we could spend another hour talking about some of this subject, but it almost could be a two-parter. So Scott, one of the things, when I read the article, I passed it on to Cliff and Joe. It really resonated with me. The first article that I ever wrote in the industry was in I think 1995 when John Downey was still the editor of Clean Facts, and the title of the article was the restoration technician is the lead technician is the heart and soul of a restoration company. Over time, I think it's evolved. The biggest question that I ever got asked in all the years of my travel is, do you know any good project managers? And I'm thinking, yeah, whoever asked me, I said, yeah, you and about 1,000 other people want the same thing. But what resonated in the article was the fact that the estimators are data entry clerks. A lot of these project managers never really had to provide a budget and look at cost of sales and what kind of profitability made. And the technicians are equipment movers, etc. And maybe part of this has come to the prescriptive nature of the standards that have been kind of adopted by the insurance industry, and it's kind of become kind of the guys out there become automatons, and they don't have the flexibility to do what's necessary because every job's a little different. One of the things that Mickey Lee always advocated for is he said, do what's right for the project.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter whether it's covered by insurance, doesn't matter, who the client is. None of that stuff matters. What matters is, what does the project need to return it back to pre-loss condition? And if everybody concentrated on that, it's going to mutually serve the interest of the insurance company, the contractors, and the property owners. And that's kind of separating what the project actually needs and what people may want and what kind of desires they have. And I always appreciated that. That was kind of part of his project management pitch. The model for this lead technician to run the job from cradle to grave, most jobs, really leads back to the remodeling industry. Years ago, one of the estimating programs in that industry, even before the digital age, talked about the lead carpenter running a remodeling job. So it's very analogous. I think that I always looked at estimating. The project manager could be two models: either the estimating and sales model, then you turn over to production and operations, or the cradle to grave for the project manager. I kind of prefer the cradle to grave for the project manager, but either one will work, and both can be very effective. So I'm interested, number one, in what your thoughts are on that, and also more so the call to action of your article, which we really haven't discussed on the show yet. Maybe this will be something good to wrap up with your thoughts, and Cliff, etc. Is, how do we fix it? Where do we go? How do we get it back to where it was? Because quite frankly, almost all the issues that you brought up were the same issues that Cliff and me dealt with in the 80s when we were growing up in the industry, right? And every 20 years, each generation seems to have to relearn what the generation before them already knows. And
Sure.
a good friend of ours at the show, Joe Stiebrick, always talked about this. He says it's a lack of institutional or generational memory. And one of the things that I said in my little tribute with Mickey that we talked about at my lunch with him that day was, those of us that are kind of playing the 18th hole of our careers, how can we pass on what we know to the next generation so they don't have to relearn things that we already know? And maybe that's kind of part of the fix. So I don't know. I hope that makes sense to you. There's a lot more discussion on this particular topic, but why don't you give me your thoughts on the model, how we fix it, and where do we go from here to kind of get the industry on track?
So the model, how do you fix it, right? It depends on whether you're mitigation or you're construction. So I'm a big proponent, but it's just maybe because of my perspective and how I came in the industry, is the sell right run, right? And so the customer has one point of contact through the entire process. Now you can break it up between mitigation and reconstruction because there is two different skill sets. And obviously that's how it's turned, but every pass off you get, there's a gap of communication, right? And so if you have that one point of contact, that communication gap shrinks, right? They're dealing with one person. Now, the problem with the industry is that we don't train those unicorns anymore. There's not many of us left, right? They're either a project manager or they've learned Xactimate or they're a supervisor. And so trying to combine some of that's going to take time, right? And that generational knowledge, ups and downs. And so, I mean, if you think about it, like in any industry, the metaphor of standing on the shoulders of giants, right? And so, what does that mean to me is I've learned from a lot of giants in the industry, but right, those 3 or 4 giants I've learned from have now exit the industry and they took that knowledge with them. Does that make sense? And so, you're going to have these generations. Mickey was a giant in the
Oh,
industry.
yeah. So Scott, so that was a point that my friend Joe Steebrook, uh, in that quote, if you want to see higher and further, you have to stand on the shoulders that came before you. And
Right.
that was, yeah, and that's been around for, since the
And so,
dark age.
yeah, and so when a giant leaves the industry, who's filling in that gap? Who's the next giant to stand on so the next generation can see ahead? And we're right. We at Floodlight call it a commander's intent, like in a sense of I'm the commander, or if I'm the giant, somebody stands on me, or my new general is standing on my shoulders. They can see the battlefield a little bit more clearer than them being down in the trenches. And so what we find is a lot of these PMs are operating on the technician level in the micro when they should be on the macro of the project, right? They can't see and forecast what's ahead of them. They're just a bunch of firefighters. Not everybody. I'm using generalizations, right? There's some fantastic PMs out there. But if you can't see what's in forecast ahead of you, those budgets and all that kind of stuff, that's super important. So where do we start? I think it's just on the career path, right? Level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Then once you're a level 4 lead, you're starting getting project management abilities. Once you become a project manager, who's better to be an estimator than somebody who knows everything that does to develop that scope of work? And so I think we fractionalize things and we just throw people in positions. You know how to use Xactimate, so you're an estimator, right? Well, they don't know what it takes to put a truss on a building. They've never seen it happen. They don't know everything that comes right that belongs into what all the components that's going to take. And so when it comes to the question about profits shrinking, yes, carriers have some of to do with it. We have a big portion of blame as that as well, is because we just don't have the proper skill level or knowledge level to transparently discuss or overcome objections when the carrier brings it up.
Yeah. Well, I think the industry is moving towards what you talked about, the hierarchy of the tiers. I know the IICRC, REA, I think they're working on these kinds of things, getting our own NAICS code. Obviously, it was big that we talked about early in the show. And, that whole model really just comes from the trades of an apprentice to a journeyman to a master. And I think that's where the whole thing is going and where it
Yeah, if
should
we can
go.
systemize that, that'd be awesome, because then now you're going to start filling in those gaps of that knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also agree with the one other thing you said. Not every project requires billing for supervision and project management. I think we need to discern that. And I think and oftentimes it's just something that's expected. It's not obviously not part of 10+10, but if you had properly trained lead techs, the margin should be built into the processes that they do, and you don't need to add this extra cost on. And I think it's on a job by job basis too. So that's always been a challenge with the insurance companies. They don't like to pay for that. Oftentimes they're probably being charged when they shouldn't pay, but a lot of times they don't want to pay when they should pay. So that's obviously that's probably more of a communication and education challenge than anything else. So well, listen, Scott, I'm going to turn it over to Cliff and Joe to close things out, but appreciate you coming on, and keep up the good work with that storyline and kind of following how we fix it, because that's what I got out of the article. You were real blunt in the beginning, said here's a problem, and he said we got to fix it. So let's see what we can do about fixing it. Anyway,
Sure.
so there you go.
Cliff.
Yeah,
Cliff.
I'm just, I guess just one comment. It seems that it's harder than ever to just get people that are willing to work and willing to come in, for an interview and so on and so forth. I don't know what's going to motivate, people that are certainly capable of working to, get back into, back into employment. So
Well,
kind of see
that's a
that.
great point, right? And so I'll just address that real quick. It doesn't matter what the labor market looks like, our ability. It all falls back on how do I onboard and how do I train and how do I prep my people to be successful in their roles. So I don't care where they came from. If you got a good attitude, you want to come to work, right? And you have the IQ and the aptitude to, right, put in place what I'm showing you, that's fine. I just know that I'm going to have a little bit longer ramp up period with you, but I better have a system and a process in place to get you ready to be 100%.
Good point.
Scott, before we go, we always like to give our guest the last word. Any final thoughts? I know we had probably another 10 questions set up for you here, so pick one out or just summarize everything if you would.
Summarize everything. Make training intentional for your team at all levels. It only makes your team better, right? It makes your business better. It makes your business more profitable. Number two, get involved and network in the industry. We're better as a whole than separate. I know there's segmented groups. RIA is doing a great job. If you're not a member of RIA, please join it. They have fantastic resources. They have an advocacy part of it. They're doing great work. We're better together to combat some of the carrier pushback, the third party pushback than ever when we're together than we're separated. I would say if we can do those two things, we can start make changes. I mean, because the other thing too is carriers can take advantage of us because they know where our talent pool is at and the knowledge level, and we're fractions. So they're together as a carrier, right? When they go to the legislature for something, they go together. So we need to act as a group and fight for, in a term, right? Professionally fight for what is ours, what we want, where we want the industry to go. We should not allow a third party dictate where we want to take the industry. And we have full control of that. And again, join the RA, start networking with together. Man, I don't believe in competition. Start meeting with your local competition locally and discuss your problems and stuff together, because you're only going to make each other better. And you're going to be overcome some of the objections that are coming from the carrier side.
The power of association. Scott, thank you very much for joining us. This is Radio Joe saying thanks to this week's guest, Scott Maysura. I also want to thank my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Slotnick, the restoration industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli, Grayson Gone Fishing Fisher at the controls. We're going to replay some shows in August, take our little August break here and refresh ourselves and come back strong in early September. This is Radio Joe saying thanks to our audience and our sponsors. We'll be back in a few weeks with the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.